Mom, you cannot seriously wear that. David's voice sliced through the elegant chatter of the hotel lobby, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests. I looked down at my navy blue silk dress. It was vintage, tailored perfectly to my frame and the exact dress my late husband Arthur had loved on me. It held beautiful memories. I thought it was elegant and appropriate for my age. My son apparently did not share my sentiment. David let out a harsh, breathless laugh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You look like a thrift store mannequin." "This is a black tie event, Mom. My corporate colleagues are here. Sophie's entire extended family is here. You are an absolute embarrassment to us." Before I could even process his cruel words, Sophie walked over. She wore a custom designer gown, dripping with fresh pearls, clutching a glass of champagne. She looked me up and down her lips, curling into a tight, highly practical smile. "David is right, Martha," she whispered, leaning in, so only I could hear the venom in her voice. "You stick out like a sore thumb. We spent an absolute fortune curating the modern aesthetic for this wedding. You look like you belong in a retirement home diner. Please just stay in the back during the formal photos. I really don't want you ruining the aesthetic." A younger version of myself might have cried. A weaker mother might have apologized, rushed upstairs, and frantically tried to find something else to wear to appease them. But I am 65 years old. I buried a husband, raised a child alone, and built a comfortable life entirely from scratch. I don't cry over spoiled children. I looked at David. His eyes held no warmth, only a shallow panic about his social image. He was 32, wearing a tuxedo paid for by a credit card he didn't even own. "I understand," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "I will stay out of your way." I turned and walked away toward the grand staircase. I didn't yell or make a public scene. I simply let the physical distance grow between us. David smiled, thinking he was dismissing a fragile, out-of-touch widow. He had absolutely no idea that he was standing in my lobby on my marble floors, insulting the owner of the very hotel he was trying to show off. I walked away from the glittering, noisy lobby and headed straight for the administrative wing of the building. The heavy oak doors clearly read, "Staff only," but I pushed them open without a single second thought. Inside, the frantic, high-stakes energy of wedding preparation was in full swing. Thomas, the general manager, looked up from his clipboard. When he saw me, his professional posture relaxed, his shoulders immediately dropped, and he offered a warm, genuine smile. "Martha," he greeted respectfully, "I thought you were taking the entire weekend off to just relax and be the mother of the groom. Is the luxury suite to your liking?" "The suite is fine, Thomas," I answered, taking a seat in the comfortable leather chair opposite his wide desk. "But there has been a slight change of plans regarding the billing procedures for this weekend." Thomas raised an eyebrow, setting his pen down carefully. He knew me extremely well. We had worked together for over 15 years, ever since I bought this struggling historic estate, and quietly turned it into the most sought-after wedding venue in the state. David booked the grand ballroom, the outdoor terrace, and 20 premium suites for his guests. I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "Originally, I told the accounting department to comp the entire event as my wedding gift to him. I want that reversed immediately." Thomas didn't ask probing questions. He simply opened the master billing file on his computer monitor. "Reversed entirely, yes," I confirmed, staring at the screen. "Generate the standard invoice. Full price for the ballroom, the catering, the premium bar, and all the suites. Add the standard service gratuity for the staff. Do not apply the owner's discount." David had always assumed this hotel belonged to a faceless corporate conglomerate that I merely managed. I purposely kept my ownership quiet to protect him from growing up lazy. Clearly, my silence had only fed his massive entitlement. "Understood." Thomas nodded his fingers, tapping rapidly across the keyboard. "When would you like the final bill presented to the groom?" "At the end of the reception," I replied, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Let him enjoy the party first. The rehearsal dinner was held in the garden pavilion surrounded by blooming roses. I arrived exactly on time, wearing the same vintage navy dress. I found my assigned seat not at the main family table, but in the far back corner, directly next to the swinging kitchen doors. I sat quietly watching the busy waiters rush past me with trays of roasted lamb and expensive champagne. Across the room, David and Sophie held court. Sophie's parents sat beside them, laughing loudly and raising their crystal glasses. I picked up my silver fork and ate my salad in complete silence. A few minutes later, David's best man tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted down for the traditional speeches. Sophie's father stood up first, straightening his tie. "I just want to toast my amazing new son-in-law, David." When Sophie told us she was marrying a man who could afford to rent out the entire Oakwood estate, without blinking an eye, I knew she had found a real provider. A man who knows how to treat his bride like an absolute queen. The room erupted in polite, enthusiastic applause. David smiled smugly, wrapping his arms securely around Sophie's waist. He didn't correct his father-in-law. He didn't mention that the only reason he could afford this venue was because he thought his mother had pulled strings with her boss to get it for free. He was playing the role of a self-made millionaire entirely funded by my bank accounts. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, but he lived in a penthouse and drove a leased sports car, all heavily subsidized by the allowance I quietly deposited into his account every month. I watched him soak in the praise, looking completely unbothered by the fact that his mother was sitting near the noisy dishwashing station. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt a strange, cold clarity settling over my mind. I pulled out my phone under the table. It was time to stop pretending. I opened my banking application. The financial umbilical cord was decades overdue for a cut. I stared at the bright screen, ready to make a fundamental change. The soft glow of my phone screen illuminated my face in the dim corner of the pavilion. I navigated straight to the joint accounts section. Years ago, when David bought his first house, I co-signed and linked our accounts to help him build credit. I had left the connection open out of habit, essentially providing him with an invisible, endless safety net. He also held a platinum credit card tied directly to my primary business account. He told me he only used it for absolute emergencies. I knew he used it for expensive dinners, designer clothes for Sophie, and apparently a massive deposit for a luxury honeymoon in Bora Bora. I tapped the settings icon next to his name. The menu dropped down. Remove authorized user. The app asked for confirmation. I didn't hesitate for a single second. I pressed confirm. Next, I went to the primary checking account where I had set up a recurring monthly transfer of $3,000 to help with his living expenses. I deleted the scheduled transfer immediately. Finally, I opened the security tab for the platinum credit card. I didn't just lower the limit to inconvenience him. I selected the option to freeze the card entirely. The screen flashed a bright green check mark. Card successfully locked. Just like that, it was done. No dramatic screaming matches, no tearful ultimatums, no begging for respect. I simply took my money back. I placed my phone back into my purse and finished my dinner. Across the room, David was signaling the bartender for another bottle of vintage champagne. He looked so confident, so entirely sure of his elevated place in the world. He had spent his entire adult life standing on my shoulders, yet he truly believed he was flying all on his own. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, stood up, and quietly exited the pavilion. I needed a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was the wedding, and I had a feeling David was going to need a lot of energy for what was coming. The morning of the wedding was crisp and incredibly bright. I woke up early, ordered room service, and enjoyed a quiet cup of black coffee on my private balcony. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to walk down the long hall to the bridal suite. I held a small velvet box tightly in my hand. Inside was a pair of beautiful diamond drop earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. I had always planned to give them to my future daughter-in-law on her wedding day. I knocked softly. A bridesmaid opened the door, looking highly stressed. The suite was completely chaotic, filled with makeup artists and hairstylists, and empty mimosa glasses scattered across the tables. Sophie sat in the center of the room, staring intently into a brightly lit vanity mirror. I stepped inside the room. "Sophie, you look absolutely beautiful," I offered, approaching her chair gently. She glanced at me through the mirror, her expression instantly hardening into a glare. "Martha, what are you doing in here? The photographer is arriving in 10 minutes for the getting ready shots. You aren't dressed for the theme. I just came to bring you this," I said, holding out the velvet box. "It's a family tradition?" Sophie didn't even reach for the box. She sighed heavily, clearly annoyed by my mere presence. "Martha, I appreciate the thought, but I am wearing custom pearls. Vintage jewelry really doesn't fit my aesthetic at all. Please, can you just go? You're crowding the space." Just then, David walked out of the adjoining room already dressed in his tailored tuxedo trousers. He saw me and immediately frowned deeply. "Mom, come on," David groaned, putting his hands on his hips. "Sophie is stressed enough. Stop bothering her. Just go down to the lobby and wait until the ceremony starts. Don't make things difficult today." I looked at my son. He was fiercely defending a woman who was actively disrespecting his mother. I slowly closed the velvet box with a soft click. "You're right," I replied calmly, sliding the box back into my pocket. "I wouldn't want to ruin your perfect day. I'll see myself out." The ceremony took place on the grand lawn, perfectly overlooking the pristine lake. It was a picture-perfect setup costing tens of thousands of dollars in floral arrangements and seating alone. I took a seat in the third row on the groom's side. The front row was entirely occupied by Sophie's extended family and a few of David's loud college friends. Nobody asked me to move up. Nobody saved a seat of honor for the mother of the groom. The string quartet began to play. The wedding proceeded flawlessly. They exchanged rings, said their vows, and kissed to a chorus of loud cheers. During the cocktail hour, I stood near the edge of the stone terrace, sipping sparkling water. David grabbed a microphone to welcome the guests before dinner. He stood proudly on the grand staircase, looking down at the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," David announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "Sophie and I wanted this day to be perfect. When I started out in my career, I promised myself I would work hard enough to give my future wife the world. Standing here at this incredible estate, hosting all of you, I can proudly say that hard work pays off." The guests clapped enthusiastically. I took another sip of my water. His hard work. It was a fascinating, entirely fictional narrative. He had never worked a weekend in his life. He had quit 3 different jobs because they were too demanding, before I quietly asked a business associate to hire him. He looked straight at me for a split second during his speech, his eyes arrogant and dismissive, before turning back to his new bride. He truly believed he was the absolute king of the castle. I checked my watch. The reception was scheduled to last until midnight. The final vendor payments were due exactly at 10 o'clock. The illusion was holding strong, but the foundation had already been removed. I just had to wait for the collapse. While the guests happily moved into the grand ballroom for a lavish dinner, I slipped away from the crowd and walked back to the administrative wing. The heavy bass of the wedding DJ faintly vibrated through the thick walls. Thomas was sitting in his office reviewing the final financial tallies for the evening. He looked up immediately as I entered the room. "Everything is proceeding perfectly, Martha," Thomas reported, adjusting his glasses. The catering staff is serving the main courses now. The premium open bar is heavily active. Good. I nodded, taking a seat across from him. I want to review the final invoice before it goes directly to my son. Thomas handed me a freshly printed sheet of paper. I scanned the itemized list carefully. The grand ballroom rental, the imported white orchids, the filet mignon dinners for 200 guests, the top-shelf liquor, and the luxury suite rentals. The total at the bottom of the page was exactly $68,400. This is completely accurate, I said, sliding the paper back across the desk. As you know, hotel policy strictly requires all non-comped events to settle the final balance before the last hour of the reception. Yes, ma'am. Thomas agreed, picking up the paper. Should I present it to him privately in a side room? No need for extreme privacy, but don't make a major spectacle, I instructed. Just walk up to his table at 10 o'clock and politely present the folio. When he attempts to put it on his platinum card, let the machine do its job. Thomas offered a knowing, quiet smile. He had seen David's arrogant behavior around the hotel staff all weekend. David treated the servers like peasants, snapping his fingers to get their attention. The staff was more than ready for a reality check. I will handle it personally, Martha, Thomas assured me. Thank you, I said, standing up. I smoothed out the skirt of my outdated vintage navy dress. I think I'll go back and enjoy a slice of wedding cake. I paid for it after all. The ballroom was spectacular, bathed in warm amber lighting. The massive dance floor was packed with energetic guests. I sat at a small table near the back of the room, enjoying a cup of coffee and a generous piece of vanilla buttercream cake. At exactly 10 o'clock, I watched Thomas walk through the heavy double doors. He carried a sleek black leather folio. He navigated smoothly through the dancing crowd and approached the head table where David and Sophie were busy taking selfies with their bridal party. I couldn't hear the conversation over the loud music, but I had a clear view of their faces. Thomas leaned in respectfully and handed the folio to David. David looked highly annoyed at the interruption. He waved his hand dismissively, opened the folio, and barely glanced at the paper inside. He confidently pulled the platinum credit card from his tuxedo jacket and dropped it onto the bill. Thomas nodded, pulled a portable wireless payment terminal from his pocket, and inserted the card. David went back to talking to his groomsmen, completely unbothered. A few seconds passed. Thomas looked at the screen, then quietly leaned in and spoke directly to David. David frowned, his annoyance quickly turning into deep confusion. He snatched the terminal from Thomas's hand and stared at the screen. Even from the back of the room, I could easily imagine the bold red letters flashing on the device. Declined. David aggressively tapped the screen and handed it back angrily, gesturing for Thomas to run it again. Thomas obliged. A few seconds later, the exact same result. Sophie noticed the commotion and leaned over. David's face began to flush bright red. He dug into his pocket, pulling out his personal debit card, and handed it over. Thomas ran it. Declined. Insufficient funds. The casual arrogance completely melted off David's face in an instant. He stood up rapidly, looking frantically around the grand ballroom. His eyes scanned the large crowd, desperately searching for his safety net. He was looking for the embarrassment in the vintage dress. David marched angrily across the ballroom, his face pale and shining with sweat. Thomas followed calmly, just a few steps behind. David reached my small table and slammed his hands down hard, rattling my coffee cup against the saucer. "Mom, my cards are freezing up," he hissed, trying desperately to keep his voice low so the nearby guests wouldn't hear his panic. "The bank must have put a strict fraud alert on your platinum card. Call them right now and authorize the charge. Thomas is harassing me for $68,000. I took a slow sip of my coffee, placing the cup gently on the saucer. "There is no fraud alert, David. I locked the card. David stared at me, his brain struggling to process the simple words. What? Why would you do that? Unlock it. I have a massive venue to pay for. You do, I replied calmly. You hosted a beautiful wedding, but I am no longer funding your lifestyle. You removed me from the family photos, you hid me in the back corners, and you called me an embarrassment. So I removed myself from your finances. Are you insane? David practically choked his eyes wide with absolute panic. I can't pay this. I don't have 60 grand. You told Thomas to comp this. You pulled strings. Thomas stepped forward, holding the black folio firmly. Excuse me, David. Martha didn't pull strings. Martha is the sole owner of the Oakwood estate. She owns the hotel, the grounds, and the catering company. You are a paying guest, and your bill is fully due. The color completely drained from David's face. He looked from Thomas to me, his jaw slacking open. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The hotel, the wealth, the power. It was all mine. You own this, he whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. I do, I smiled politely. And since your cards are declining, Thomas will need you to set up a rigid payment plan. I expect the first installment by Monday morning. I didn't stay for the rest of the reception. I walked upstairs, packed my small suitcase, and fell into a deep, incredibly peaceful sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the hotel was completely quiet. I walked down to the lobby, pulling my luggage behind me. The remaining wedding guests were slowly filtering out, looking exhausted and heavily hungover. I saw Sophie sitting on a velvet sofa near the main entrance, her oversized designer sunglasses, pushing back her messy hair. She looked utterly miserable. David was standing at the front desk, aggressively signing a thick stack of binding payment agreements with Thomas. He was legally bound to pay back every single cent of the $68,000 plus interest. His leased sports car would have to be returned immediately. His luxury apartment would likely be next. He saw me walking toward the main doors. He dropped the pen and rushed over, physically blocking my path. Mom, please, he begged, his voice stripped of all its former arrogant swagger. You can't leave us with this massive debt. We're supposed to go to Bora Bora today. We have no money. Please, I'm sorry about the dress. I'm sorry about everything. I looked at my son. I felt no lingering anger, just a profound, settling sense of closure. You can still go to Bora Bora, David, I said softly, looking him straight in the eyes. But you'll have to earn the money yourself. Just like I did. But we are family, he pleaded, glancing nervously at Sophie, who was watching us in stunned, humiliated silence. Family respects each other, I replied, stepping smoothly around him. You only respected my wallet. Have a safe trip home, David. I walked out the grand glass doors and handed my keys to the valet. The morning sun felt incredibly warm on my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the heavy weight of my son's entitlement. I got into my car and drove away, ready to finally enjoy the empire I had quietly built.